Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday, July 3rd, 2017. Happy Monday to you. Happy July to you. Happy July 4th weekend to you. If you're lucky enough to have 2 days off this week, boy, aren't you lucky? 4-day weekend. We got a couple of those in the works since the 4th, obviously, is Tuesday. A few places that I guess thought it might be really cool to give Monday off, too. We have, my wife's got a floating holiday at her place of employment, and they opted to stick it right in the middle there, so we have a nice 4-day weekend going. Not me, though. I'm here on the radio, although it's always a holiday. Being here with you in the morning, it really is. I can't skip it. I couldn't skip it this weekend, and I didn't want to. Too much happening over the weekend. Weird weekend, of course. No different from any other in the sense that all the craziness has been happening over the those 2 weekend days, and the Friday and Monday surrounding. So it's always a long weekend in the Trump era. Much to catch up on, some of which is of serious import, some of which is not, but simply reflects the times in which we live. And not all of it has to do with Donald Trump. Everyone up in arms yesterday. Yesterday morning's explosion was over Trump's, by the way, he's the president of the United States. I'm not certain if you're all aware of this. You've probably been observing him closely, but I don't know if you've been able to pick up on the fact that he's president of the United States. He's not doing much to reflect that in the change, in terms of changing his daily routine. Yesterday's furor was over his, I guess a retweeting of some alt-right weirdos, stupid childish meme of, I guess they took the footage of that time when Donald Trump for reals really did do that WWF stunt with Vince McMahon and made some sort of an appearance on their show. And I guess at the time I didn't see the original. They must have staged one of those out-of-the-ring fights between managers, and I guess Donald Trump was supposed to be managing a fighter at that point. And so they had footage of him jumping on top of I don't know who, wrestling fans probably know who, and appearing to beat them up, and I guess an alt-right guy with too much time on his hands, because that's what alt-right means. It means I have too much time on my hands. Photoshopped the CNN logo over the face of the person he was beating. You've all seen it by now. I mean, I hope that there's no point in my describing the thing to you. And then the rest of the day was consumed by people trying to decide whether that constituted a serious threat, a physical threat of some kind to CNN reporters, or whether it was just stupid and beneath the dignity of the office of the president, or both, or what. And take your pick, as far as I'm concerned. But as others were pointing out yesterday, you don't need to really worry about this too much, because thankfully no politicians, nobody serious in this country would take seriously the idea of body slamming a journalist, right? I did get a couple of interesting responses from some folks overseas. Australia, one jumps out at me that somebody said, well, yeah, until they do. And that's a good warning ordinarily, except, of course, we've already had that incident here in the United States. That's what we were talking about. But free pass for those watching from Australia. I don't expect that you're going to be up on every single story on every single provincial politician, though we did promote this particular provincial politician to the United States Congress. But still, 435 of those. We don't keep track of them all. There's no chance that I should expect the Australian observers to keep track of all of them, too. But hopefully you've caught up on that story. Much more to catch up on. It is July 4th weekend. That means a beach weekend for those of us coastal elites that live close enough within striking distance to get to the beach. Unless, of course, you live in New Jersey, in which case, you can still get to the beach. You just have to get to private beaches or municipally operated beaches. You can't go to any of the state parks, and there are many, that are reserved for the enjoyment of, well, anybody. You don't have to be from New Jersey in order to enjoy them. But this time you can't because the government of New Jersey, the state government, is in the middle of one of those government shutdowns that happens when the executive and legislative branches cannot agree on how to spend their money. Interesting angle on this one, of course, you've likely heard. This one, too, Governor Chris Christie, I think least popular governor in the nation, as Greg's been telling us, decided, in the middle of his own government shutdown situation, he decided to take advantage of the fact that the governor has available to him a beach residence in Island Beach State Park, a very popular July 4th weekend in particular destination for just about anybody looking for some good times out at the beach. They closed it, but the Christies enjoyed it nonetheless, having the entirety of the park and the entirety of the beach all to themselves, and the luxury of having the state police at the gates to the park turning away everyone else. All other comers turned away by the state police, and of course they did some good work up in New Jersey, some great journalistic achievement, hiring one of those planes that sometimes you see them flying advertising banners up and down the beach. This time carrying a Newark Star Ledger photographer taking pictures with a telephoto lens of the Christie family all alone on this fabulous beach. And by the way, the Island Beach State Park beaches are contiguous with some publicly accessible beaches that are not state-supported, but you can see the very clear delineation between the empty stretch of sea available exclusively, privately to the Christie family. Yeah. And the jam that's going on. I mean, the beaches are always crowded on July 4th weekend, but doubly crowded because the people who are ordinarily spread out down into Island Beach State Park all had to be herded into the beaches to the north while the Christies enjoyed their solitude. So, interesting juxtaposition. The only way you could possibly, it's very difficult to drive your popularity down below where he is, 17%, 15%, depending, I guess, on the polling. But one way to do it would be to close a fantastic state beach on July 4th weekend, but open it up to yourself and your family and use the state police to turn everyone else away. We'll see whether that won't yet show up in the polling, but we'll find out what has shown up. Greg's here. Good morning, Greg. How you doing?
Hey, good morning. The fun thing about Christie is that, it wasn't just that he did it.
Yes, he did do it.
It was his response. People complain about it. Well, there's a governor, a mansion there. There's a governor house to live. So if you want to do this, get yourself elected governor and you can live there. Otherwise, shut up.
Yeah, that's, I'm sure he thought that was part of his sort of tough guy image
charm
thing. But yeah, that one, that I don't know if that's going to fly. I mean, honestly.
Well, if you want to be lower than 15%, that's the way to do it.
That's true. He's an achiever, right? We said it was impossible. He showed us how.
Yeah, basically, he's giving the middle finger to New Jersey and saying, whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still counting myself as a New Jerseyan, but New Jerseyans pay, of course, the taxes to support both the governor's mansion and Island Beach State Park. And, I mean, it's a bit of a weird perk, but it's not one that anybody minds terribly so long as they get to use the park too.
Right.
Now, man.
The funny thing, though, is that, the New York Times on their front page has a little bit of a piece about that. And the little blurb they have is Christie basks in a last battle over the New Jersey budget. And, of course, they show the picture of him sitting in the beach chair.
Yes.
And it says the state government will be closed for a third day on Monday, having not met the July 1st budget deadline, as Governor Christie shows that he will maintain his brash style of governing to the end. Mm-hmm. This is New York Times. We're talking about New York, New Jersey.
Yeah.
The guy is an asshole. Just say it.
Yeah, pretty much. Brash style. Yeah.
He's a jerk.
Right. Well, now I guess this gets on top. You can add this on top of a get the hell off the beach. Now it's get the hell off of my beach.
Pretty much. Get out of my face.
Right. I mean, it was one thing when it was, well, I don't know.
A teacher, right? Yeah. It was one thing was a teacher and it was on YouTube. And it's another thing when not letting anybody else get to the beach, but you get to be there.
Yeah.
And then deny that you had any son. And then come up with that ridiculous remark about, well, he was wearing a hat.
Okay. Well, I've also seen, let's see, already Darth has gotten a hold of this thing and has photoshopped him into the Oval Office, that shot with Kellyanne Conway
kneeling on the couch. Yeah, that was a great shot by Darth.
So it's he's already memed, and that was about as dumb a thing as I could possibly imagine a governor doing. But luckily, not all of us are governors, so we can't exceed that level of idiocy. I've got plenty of stories about it, some of which you'll hear in the roundup, no doubt, and others of which you will have heard about on Twitter, and we'll talk about later. What have you got for us today in your collection?
Let's start also with that CNN thing. There's a really nice piece in USA Today. At the very end of the list that I sent you, I got a couple of pieces about Trump and the media, which I think are important. CNN caved to Trump, says Paul Schiff, Schiff, Berman, opinion contributor at USA Today, which has had some wonderful opinion pieces. He's the Walter S. Cox Professor of Law at the George Washington University Law School. And he says, imagine what might have remained hidden about Watergate.
Yeah.
If Ben Bradley had encouraged or allowed Woodward and Bernstein to resign after a mistake.
Oh. That's a good point.
Right? He goes on and says, yeah, maybe they moved a little bit too quickly, but these are quality people. And the CNN journalists in question were not fly-by-night individuals with no track record. The reporter was Thomas Frank, in journalism for 3 decades, Pulitzer Prize finalist for USA Today. Before coming to CNN, Eric Lichtblau, editor of Frank's piece, was a Pulitzer Prize winner himself, highly respected reporter at the New York Times for many years. Lex Harris, the executive editor of CNN Investigations, had been a long-time employee of CNN and most recently executive editor of CNN Money. These are people deserving of support in a time of crisis. They should not have been allowed to resign. It's worth remembering that even the legendary Woodward and Bernstein made a few errors during their period of reporting on the Watergate scandal. Most significantly, you may remember this from the movie or the book, they reported that President Nixon's chief of staff, H.R. Haldeman, controlled a secret slush fund of money and that the proof derived from grand jury testimony by Hugh Sloan. The problem is Sloan had not, in fact, testified about Haldeman's involvement in the grand jury, but it turned out they were right anyway.
Yeah.
So, under intense pressure from the Nixon administration, what happened back in the day is that summarizing is that Ben Bradley backed up his reporters and said, just keep going, don't make any more mistakes or you'll get me mad. But the fact of the matter is that they kept on it and it turned out the whole big story was correct.
Then they get their jobs back. They never lost them.
But I mean, so what CNN did basically is Jeff Zucker folded to pressure. And let's just say I have an extremely low opinion of Zucker anyway.
Yes, that's fair to say.
Right.
But you know what? I'll say it even if I can't prove it right now. I think you have a low opinion of him, but okay. Well, you'll testify to that, so I need another example.
I do. Here's National Review. Kevin Williamson, junkie running dry. Some people simply cannot handle the fact that Donald Trump was elected president, and one of those people is Donald Trump.
That's true. Before you say, I hadn't even really tracked the CNN. I mean, I knew about the story, but Thomas Frank, are we talking about what's the matter with Kansas, Thomas Frank?
I don't know.
Okay.
The common enough name. I don't know if it's the same person. I don't think so, but I'm not sure.
All right. Well, that'd be interesting if it was, but okay. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt the next story.
Right. So this says Donald Trump cares more about how he is perceived in the media than he cares about anything else in the world, including money. Trump is a true disciple of Bishop Berkeley, professing the creed of the social media age is to be seen. Trump is incapable of enjoying anything, money, success, or sex, without being perceived enjoying it. Consider, even though he has in fact been on the cover of Time magazine, it was discovered this week that he had his people produce some fake Time magazine
yes.
covers, lauding the success of his television show. By the way, the New Yorker's cover was a hand drawing of that, which was really quite amusing. He had these fake Time covers displayed at Trump properties around the world. Why? Because Trump, for all his professed contempt for the media, believes that success is not success until it is certified by Time magazine or, avert thine eyes, Hannity, the New York Times. So basically, that's the bottom line for him. And he continues to want the success of the very people who he disdains, who in fact truly do disdain him. So that happens. But let's get to healthcare. Healthcare is the thing on the table for right now. And it's true that Trump uses his tweets as a distraction from everything. The Russia story still goes on, but of course that's going to be at a low-level boil. So it's a simmer. The healthcare thing is still out there. What happened is that the Republicans were unable to come to a conclusion about what they want. And despite every noise that Mitch McConnell made, and despite every single report about, the wily Mitch McConnell must have something up his sleeve, they failed.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, they couldn't do it. And because they couldn't do it, it turned out that they broke and went to recess and have to face their constituents without actually having a bill, and they still can't agree on what they're talking about. Bill Cassidy got clobbered at a town meeting. The rest of them probably don't want to have town meetings, but there are July 4th parades tomorrow or today, and they're not going to be able to avoid them because politicians are always there. So we have to see what that is going on about. But the big theme here is, here's the Josh Krasauer limited access, that is to say for a short period of time, piece from National Journal. Why Republicans are losing the healthcare fight. GOP leaders sound so unconvinced about the merits of their own proposed policy that they've stopped trying to make the case for reform entirely. And Josh goes on to make the case that, look, if you can't sell it or you won't sell it, then you're going to have terrible polling numbers. And in fact, there are terrible polling numbers, not only for the bill itself, down in the 12 to 17% range, but there's a whole host of new polls out. Yeah, they're in Chris Christie range. But there's a whole host of new polls out showing that the public will vote against any senator who votes for this piece of junk.
Yeah.
There's 4 separate polls that are looking at, how people feel about this. We'll get to those. But the whole point is that the idea of this being a winner and wily Mitch McConnell just being able to spend $200 billion in order to get what he wants is just not necessarily true. And there's a companion piece here that isn't really about healthcare. It's about the White House briefing, but it's by Jay Rosen. Why the White House daily briefing is in such trouble. Wake up. Trump is not trying to win the support of anyone who is not naturally aligned with him. And goes on to say the whole reason that the press briefing should be suspended or you should send interns, which he said for a long time, is that they're not trying to give you information. In fact, when you press them, they'll usually say, well, I haven't talked about this with Trump.
Yes.
Well, because they don't want to talk about it because either Trump doesn't know and they don't want to expose that, or he does know and they don't want to expose that. They want to shape reality to the way they want to shape it, and that's the purpose of the briefing. And if that's the case, the media doesn't need to participate. Just like with the CNN hit, it's pretty clear that what Trump is trying to do is manipulate the media, and they are not obligated to follow that. But part of this theme here is that Trump is only trying to persuade his base and nobody else. That's also true with healthcare. Nobody else except the base really thinks this is a good idea, and even they have very, very mixed feelings. So let me just give you a Dan Diamond brief tweet storm here. Because what he's done is he has collected stories from local papers. And he says, many GOP senators home for recess woke up today to front page stories about the local damage their health bill would cause. New Orleans Advocate, that's Cassidy. LA faces major losses under health bill, Louisiana. Houston Chronicle, why target the kids? That's of Ted Cruz. Jerry Moran and the Lawrence Journal World, disabled kids caught in Medicaid debate. These are not headlines you want to come home to and wake up to. This is Senator Capito in West Virginia. Health woes force cancer survivor out. This is South Carolina. Medicaid cuts would hurt needy South Carolina kids. State predicts major cuts to Medicaid from Alaska. That's Lisa Murkowski and Dan Sullivan. Lexington Herald leader, Rand Paul and Majority Leader McConnell, few places would lose more than Kentucky under Senate health bill studies say. And Dan Diamond goes on to say, there's been a lot of focus on what the media is and isn't covering. Give credit to the local press for using their platform to spotlight real issues. So while the national media goes on about the fake feud between Joe Scarborough and Mika Brzezinski, and I don't trust them for a minute. They're trying to get their own ratings up, and for all I know, they're helping Trump by diverting attention from healthcare. So I think the whole thing is pretty stupid. But while the national media are focusing on that, local media is focusing on what it means for your individual state. And that's really the news.
Well, that's pretty good. It relates a little bit, I think, to what you were talking about the White House press briefing story. I know that he's been advocating for a long time to send interns. It strikes me that, and how frequently the press secretaries simply say, I don't know the answer to that, I haven't spoken to the president. And it is interesting. They keep complaining. If you bring up anything but policy or substance, they, well, first of all, if you bring up anything other than policy or substance with this administration, it tends to be something stupid and indefensible that they don't want to talk about. So then they complain that you never ask any substantive questions. But then anytime you ask a substantive question, they say, I don't know. I haven't talked to the president about that. The president doesn't talk about that. He doesn't know anything about it. So those briefings are useless. But it strikes me that what they're doing is, I hate to attribute any grand strategy to them. I don't know if they've planned this or not, but the upshot of it is supposedly our best reporters in the country are in their way to the White House press corps, and they are just paralyzed daily with garbage and nonsense. The only thing the White House will talk to them about is garbage and nonsense.
Right, and that's what Jay Rosen says. Free them up, send the interns, and let them go and do their investigative reporting on Russia and the healthcare and all the other stuff.
That's really, that's a great suggestion. We have the most important stories of our time, and with people who are supposedly the best reporters, and maybe this is also maybe a good way of exposing that maybe they're not our best reporters after all. They can do bylines with other people. There's nothing. New York Times does it all the time. Mm-hmm. They get a couple of people on a story. Yeah, and but I guess hopefully our best reporters, if that's who's earning their way to the White House, could be freed up to do the work that really it's still White House focused, and of course. Yeah, but the problem is that you don't have any video to go with it. Yeah, well, every couple of days. Well, that's okay. The White House has solved that problem by not allowing you to do any video. Yes, that's true. Although for some reason they allowed some still pictures to be taken at one point. I don't know if they allowed it or people just did it. I'm not sure. I thought that they had said something about still photography being okay, or at least during one of those sessions, which, by the way, I suggest you just take several thousand such pictures in a row and then run them together. I don't know. It seems to me there's two strategies behind not allowing the video. One is that on camera you have them with the tapes of lying, and then later you get to play it back. And the other is that it's fodder for cable. Yeah. So if you don't feed cable starves, and that's fine with Trump. He'd rather just tell you the news himself. He's got his own supporters trying to convince them that the only true news is his tweets, and therefore don't even watch the news, just read my tweets. Yeah. Well, it's also a good test for our supposedly best reporters and our most valuable television programming assets who are so imaginative, and that's why they work their way to the top of the networks, to come up with a new way of presenting the news given the infrastructure they have. But so far, nothing. We've developed into a 19-person panel, half of which is hired from out of the Trump campaign to deny that what you just heard actually happened. But they're going to have to figure something out. Maybe the idea man is at the door right now, as a matter of fact, delivering the next generation of American news. But, well, we can only hope. All right. Well, you're probably busy with figuring out who it was at the door, and I'd love to know. And if it's a person who's skilled at refinishing banisters, let us know. I will. We've been doing that over the weekend, too. I sent her out to have a discussion with a chipmunk. Okay. All right. Well, Anyway, so moving on, we have this Andy Slavitt piece, an update on where we are with the GOP's healthcare plan, because nobody really knows. The White House officials keep saying it's going to pass, and if you talk to the senators, they are more and more skeptical that anything will. Yeah. So the GOP senators, as you contemplate your next step on the healthcare bill, it may be good to remind you of how you got in this mess. How did they? Obamacare wasn't popular when it started, but it was always at a minimum 3 times more popular than the bill you're considering. All the good it did, Obamacare took on the characteristics that anybody chose to ascribe to the healthcare system or to Obama. If a town closes hospital, Obamacare. If a small business exempt from the Affordable Care Act cut hours, Obamacare. Right. Never mind that many of the forces driving changes in healthcare had little to do with Obamacare, and cost, quality, and employment all improved. To be kind, look to yourselves for that sentiment, GOP. 60 repeal votes, 30 elections of lies.
defunding the law, Supreme Court cases. My point isn't to laud the ACA, refight the past. It's to tell the GOP what to expect in passing a law to address a challenging healthcare system. Big USA Today headline here, poll only 12% support GOP healthcare plan. If legitimate efforts at progress can be demagogued, imagine what'll happen with a plan people know will take coverage and protection from people. Turns out Trump Care was introduced. People saw the elements of Obamacare they would lose more clearly. So Paul Ryan's fantasy is not America's. And you ran on a 2016 promise, repeal and replace. Turns out in 2017, people thought you were actually going to try to improve things. Everything the GOP criticized Obamacare for, according to the nonpartisan CBO, Trump Care makes worse. Deductibles go up, premiums go down, uninsured go up, competition down. So that doesn't necessarily help. And the premiums themselves, depending upon who you look at, and if you use an apples to apples benchmark, they go up too. So when GOP considers why people hate Trump Care, remember you're sitting on a high watermark and you easily stoke the Obamacare flames. You put yourself in this Trump Care box. It won you elections, but look at how you got here. Trump Care doesn't keep your promise, blindly repeating closed-door deals, rush process, et cetera, not a good formula. And people are saying this every possible way they can, which is what the polls show. So if you vote for this, people won't care that you said the Affordable Care Act was broken when you really broke things. They will just remember what you did to them. And so we look here at the polling, Axios. This is from Drew Altman Kaiser Family Foundation, June 29th. GOP health plan losing support among Trump voters. In May, it was very favorable on 26% of Trump voters, and June, 20%. Okay. Somewhat favorable, 43% in May, 35% in June. The more they do, the less the Trump supporters like it. Here's one from Politico today. Democrats pressure 2020 senators on healthcare vote. Few GOP senators are up for re-election in 2018, but polling shows the Republican healthcare plan unpopular in several key 2020 states. This is a public policy polling for Save My Care, partisan polling, showing the GOP proposal, which would cut Medicaid funding and repeal Obamacare's tax increases, deeply unpopular in Iowa, North Carolina, and Colorado. 3 swing states where Republican Senate wins in 2014 helped the GOP win control of the chamber. In Iowa, only 27% of voters approve of the bill. Colorado, only 26%. And in North Carolina, where Trump won by a small margin, 33% of voters approve and 53% disapprove. And the polling is designed to show that the 3 senators may face political peril even if they're not up for re-election in 2018. AMA has a similar poll. They have a battleground poll results on GOP healthcare reform fixes, looking at Alaska, Arkansas, Colorado, Nevada, Ohio, Tennessee, and West Virginia. Interesting, they think that Tennessee is a battleground. Voters were asked their opinion of the health system reform legislation, and extremely unpopular, widespread support in each state for Medicaid, opposition for reducing spending on the program, as both the House and Senate bills would do. When asked if federal funding for Medicaid expansion should be eliminated, respondents in each of the 7 states were overwhelmingly opposed, from 54% to 63%. This polling was done by Public Opinion Strategies, which is a Republican leaning firm. Vox has the poll showing the healthcare bill could crush Senate Republicans, and this one was done by Global Strategy Group and Garen Hart Yang, so a Republican and a Democratic firm. When told a Republican Senate candidate supported the GOP's healthcare bill, voters turned sharply against their representatives. In that case, candidates' unfavorability went from 21% to 52%.
Oh. That's a lot.
So that is a lot. So you have a bunch of polling saying this is really not a popular bill, and then these senators go home and they have to face their constituents who are not happy about it. And I say all of that because, again, the conventional wisdom has been wily Mitch McConnell will simply just get it done by buying off senators. And I'm going to give you a contrarian point of view. I don't think that's necessarily true. He might do it. It's possible. He's got a lot of money to spend. But I don't think that you can get Susan Collins with a $45 million opioid infusion into this, because it's still a fraction of what you really need. And a lot of the money that you would need to deal with addiction services, mental health, and so on and so forth are taken out of the medical system by cutting back Medicaid. So she's not going to be satisfied with that. And I don't think Lisa Murkowski is going to go for a polar payoff. And I don't know that Bill Cassidy is going to do it either. And I don't really know that Dean Heller is going to change his mind with Brian Sandoval, the governor, popular governor of Nevada, being such a staunch opponent of this bill. And the fact of the matter is that people's idea that everybody's going to cave because they're moderates might be wrong. Now, I totally get the idea, and this is kind of sad, that they're politicians, and therefore it can't be trusted. I get that.
Okay.
I'm not naive, right? But we are really to the point where no matter how many times they say no, 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 everybody says, yeah, they really mean yes.
Yeah. Well,
Or maybe they mean no.
that could be. I did see some. It just occurred to me. I didn't put this one aside, but I did see someone writing up just a good examination of the myth of the wily Mitch McConnell, and just saying, honestly, his track record as a strategist and as a legislator and as a backroom manipulator isn't really all that good.
No, I think he's an excellent tactician, but I don't know how good a strategist he is.
Oh, okay. Well, there is that, of course, that difference as well. But they were just compiling.
Ask him to do a specific task using the gavel and using the rules. He's very good at that.
Well, right, and it's just a question of well, what is he doing, and what has he ever used it for?
Yeah, that's where the strategy comes in. That's why I make that distinction.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess that's possibly true. Although there were a number of tactical failures listed as well. Everybody's got their ups and downs, but
sure.
You certainly shouldn't go into it saying he's a magician and whatever it is that he decides on, he can make happen. He's failed as often as he's succeeded, but that doesn't separate him from your typical. And typically Senate leaders of both parties, when they're the majority leader, it's their job to become a master of the rules. But I guess added on top of that is the things that he's been able to muscle through tactically have not really paid off strategically necessarily in the long run. So and that eventually occurs to his fellow senators. I can follow him. He'll get this thing done, but what's he doing to me in the meantime? Politically, he's killing me. I don't know if I want him to succeed tactically at this point.
Yeah, at this point, exactly right. Now, don't forget, the whole thing was it was going to pass.
Yeah.
And it didn't. And then it was going to be rejiggered and passed by Friday, and it didn't. So he's already failed. And then the question is, well, is he failed permanently? Because just like in the House, the zombie bill can come back, and that's true.
True.
But when you go home and get this formed up in terms of, hardening your position against the bill, it gets harder and harder to buy you off, because then it looks even more nakedly like a buy off, and that doesn't help you politically either. So, that's why you hear the faint noise, the whispers, the sounds of the resurrection of Republicans saying, maybe we need to work with Democrats on this, which McConnell doesn't want to hear. But then again, he didn't want to hear I'm not voting for this bill either.
Right.
So we'll see what happens when they get back from the recess. That's going to take next week. The other piece of it is supposedly what he did is there was a whole literature about how repeal and then at a separate time replace was an awful idea.
Yes.
And had few votes.
It did.
And in fact, I have a piece in the Pundit Roundup today on that. Let me just find it, scroll down and read it. This is Stephen Dennis, one of our excellent congressional reporters. A Republican senator explained to me on January 3rd why repeal only would not fly.
Okay.
It says, a Republican senator on condition of anonymity said the details of the repeal bill remain very uncertain. Originally, Republicans are planning to simply bring back the bill they put on Obama's desk last year for his veto. But that bill was written knowing it wouldn't become law. And now some Republicans want to make tweaks to soften the blow of repeal. Even people who voted for this before are, wait a minute. We knew that wasn't going to happen, said the senator. There were no consequences. He said there's a growing sense among some of his colleagues they need to have a replacement for Obamacare ready soon because we're going to own this. This is said in January. Okay. So now you have Lee and Sass and a couple of the super conservatives saying, well, listen, if you can't get this done, which, by the way, is an acknowledgement that you can't get this done, that maybe what you need to do is break the bill into two. That's Rand Paul's idea. That you repeal and then you replace. The problem is you kick somewhere between 28 and 32 million people off of healthcare while you do that. And if they're unhappy about this happening in 2020 and beyond, or 2026 and beyond, believe me, they're going to be unhappy about it happening now.
Yes.
So the idea that you're going to get enough votes for that, they've already said they get 15, 20 votes for that, and that's about all they have. So that seems like a dumb idea as well. And therefore, when you step back and try to figure out where this is really going, it's impossible to see how this passes. This isn't the House.
Yeah, it's pretty difficult. They'd really have to, you really have to set aside the realities of what you're doing in order to imagine this passing. For Trump, I guess that's simple enough to do. He doesn't care.
The rest of them, it's not. So here's what they did. Yeah. They said, okay, McConnell said, we're going to send two bills to the CBO. One is repeal, and let's see what that does. And the other is slight tweaks to the one we already had where we don't repeal. Whatever that means. So CBO is supposed to then try to score two separate bills and have it done by the end of the week so that they can vote on it when they come back.
Okay. Well, it's possible.
Wait. It gets better.
Oh, there's more.
Yeah.
All right.
Because what does the CBO use as their baseline in order to figure out what's the result of all of this, especially if you're comparing it to current conditions? Well, what they did is, since the budget resolution was passed in 2016, I guess, they're using 2016 as a baseline, and they've done this all along, and that's what they always do. And now Republicans are complaining about this and saying, wait a minute, Obamacare is in much worse shape now than it was. Why don't you use current data as of now, because that will make us look better. And it's unfair for you to use what you've always done before because that makes us look worse. So now they're trying to play the refs and get them to change the way they do it. The problem with that is that it takes months to put these models together.
Well, that's one problem, yes.
So they can't have it done by the end of the week.
Well, that'll get in the way of things.
So you'll hear that. And so, for all of you astute listeners out there, you'll hear murmurings from Republicans. Not only is the CBO wrong because they don't know what they're doing, they cheat. Because they didn't take our advice to cheat the way we wanted, and therefore, because they're using the same old standard that they always do, they're going out of their way to make us look bad.
I guess that's one way to put it. And if they put any Democrats on the panel that you see on television, it's possible one of them may answer, well, what you're asking us to do here is to discount the damage that you've already done since Trump came into office and even before.
Yes.
So that you don't look as bad as you actually are. The changes as between the baseline from the previously passed budget and now is there's a considerable amount of damage that's been done to Obamacare by you since then. And you would like us to hide the damage you've already done and simply look prospectively. What more damage are we about to do? That's the score you want. That score is going to be terrible anyway. But what you're really trying to measure, if you're trying to measure anything at all politically, as a politician, surely you would like to illustrate the difference between Democratic policy and Republican policy. And the difference has to include all the changes that Republican policy has made. Right. You don't want that in there?
But that's way too complicated. It's much easier to follow tweets about Mika Brzezinski.
Yeah, well, that's true. We should follow that. I changed my mind.
All right, let me end with three things that are unrelated but interesting. This one is semi-related. It's by Bruce Bartlett, a disillusioned veteran of the Reagan White House, and has some advice for liberals. Why I'm not a Democrat.
Okay.
And he talks about how he became a non-Republican, and we all know that that's fairly easy. But why didn't he therefore become a Democrat? He says, of much more importance in terms of my reluctance to join the Democratic Party is the party doesn't really seem to stand for anything other than opposition to the GOP. Admittedly, just about everything the Republicans are doing deserves to be opposed. But the Democrats also need a positive agenda of their own. I remember thinking late in the 2016 campaign, I couldn't name a single policy proposal Clinton had put forward. I knew they existed, 10-point plans, the VIX programs, they were probably well thought out, but all the points were small, boring, and impossible to summarize. You had to go to her website and dig them out because they never appeared in any of her commercials or interviews. As much as I hate what the conservative movement has become, remember he's a conservative, it rose to power through some strategies that are easily duplicable by progressives. One is putting as much effort into marketing ideas as originating them. Another is coordinating efforts among disparate groups on the right. You support my cause, in return I'll support yours. And all through these efforts are continuously repeated throughout the right-wing echo chamber. It took decades for conservatives to set up the institutional infrastructure that supports and nourishes the GOP today. Fundraising was a big part of it. One thing conservatives learned is to share donors with each other through groups such as the Council for National Policy. I don't know of any similar group on the left. And progressives always complain about a lack of funds, but there's plenty of money. She didn't lose because she had less money. She had considerably more. The congressional race in Georgia's 6th District attracted tens of millions of dollars for the Democratic candidate. He lost, but not because he was underfunded. What ultimately won the day for the right was long-term focus. The left seems to me to be totally focused on the short term, stopping whatever Republicans are doing today. But as my old boss, Jack Kemp, a former pro football player, always told me, you don't win games on defense. And this is the part I liked. Another strength of the right is the left could learn its self-confidence and aggressiveness. Turn on cable news at any hour, and you will hear a right-winger expounding with bravado on some subject they have no clue about.
That is true.
If there's a liberal on for balance, they'll waste all the airtime futilely trying to explain why what their opponent said was nonsense. As a consequence, progressives never get their point across. I often joke that a Democrat is somebody who won't take their own side in a debate.
Yes, that line I liked.
I love that line. There's many other ways as well. Democrats handicap themselves. Sure, I'll work for their candidates in a choice between crazy and sane. I'll vote sane every time. But joining a party, even if it's only in my own mind, implies a higher level of commitment, one I'm not ready to make. So he says, I suppose the easiest way is to find a decent leader, one tentpole big issue. But for the time being, he'll remain an independent who's waiting for a tough, muscular Democrat with the courage of their convictions and no fear of Republicans to arise. Emmanuel Macron. He showed that being a moderate doesn't mean being weak. Fear of the right is the right's greatest strength, but one is easily punctured. If I were a Democrat, I'd study Bobby Kennedy's race in 68. By the way, he lost, or was losing. Bill Clinton in 1992, who won. Senator Pat Moynihan and other Democrats who could project strength and leadership and had new ideas to back them up. When one such Democrat emerges, I will be ready to join. And that's not bad. It's not a bad critique.
Yes, though I don't believe him.
Well, he's prejudiced against Democrats.
Yes.
I happen to think, not being an obnoxious a-hole who goes on and bloviates about stuff they don't know just for the point of trying to look like you know what you're talking about, I see that as a feature.
Yes.
Not a bug.
True.
But then again, I'm a Democrat.
Yes. But, right, so it's difficult. I mean, some of it is sort of small c constitutional differences between Democrats and Republicans. And as I said, I don't, if a strong,
but he's right about messaging.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's certainly, if the answer is to emulate the other side, and I'm not positive that it is, and this is one of the problems, right? I mean, you have a Republican would say, that is the answer. You got to let's go do that. And a Democrat says, I'm not positive yet. The science is still out on that one. I'm not sure that just being a bloviating a-hole is really a good idea. And we can't be sure, you can't be positive that you're right about that sort of thing. But Republicans aren't interested in whether or not they can be positive about being right at the moment. And it's interesting because in the short term, here's where they play the short-term game. You know what? I don't know whether I'm right or wrong, but I'm going to go on there now and I'm going to make it look like I'm right. And in all likelihood, 90% of the viewing audience will just say, that guy really seems sure of himself, and they won't check anything. And that bothers people who would like to be right, and it comforts people who, think they can win that way and don't care whether they're right or wrong. But in the meantime, I guess the ultimate outcome of not caring whether you're right or wrong is you sit home during July 4th weekend pondering whether or not you should go back to Washington and kick 20, 30, 40 million people off of their health care with no alternative, because that looks like a short-term win, so let's try it. And maybe that's not the best for the country.
So here's another interesting piece here. This is a tweet from conservative Josh Jordan, Numbers Muncher on Twitter.
Oh.
You know why Trump made those insane tweets and comments during the campaign? And by the way, I'll add, and now?
Right. What are you talking about? Yes.
Because the media gave him $2 billion in free airtime as a reward.
Just two?
He's got a chart here, bought versus free media. And he's looking at Bush, Rubio, and Bernie Sanders, Hillary Clinton, Ted Cruz, Christie, Kasich, the people that were running against him, and so on and so forth. Just as an example. Jeb bought $82 million and got $214 million free. And Rubio similarly, $55 million bought and $204 million free.
Okay.
Clinton bought 28. She bought much less than Bush and Rubio did, but got $746 million free. That makes sense. She was the nominee, and certainly of the Democrats got the most airtime, twice as much as Bernie. Bernie and Hillary bought similar amounts, but Hillary got twice the coverage.
Okay.
Okay. And you could argue why that is, but the main reason why that is she was winning during the primary and she was the nominee. Trump bought 10.
He bought 10.
As opposed to 28 for Clinton and Sanders and 82 for Bush. Trump bought 10, got 1,898.
Yeah.
Free.
Right.
Right? So people like Jeff Zucker, who complains about Bush, who complains about Trump bashing CNN. Jeff Zucker gave Trump a tremendous amount of free airtime.
Yes.
Right? He covered, like, gavel to gavel all of his rallies.
Right.
Free airtime.
There's no gavel. Okay.
You know what I'm talking about.
Yes, here. Right.
Gavel to gavel is beginning to end, even though it's not a formal thing, so there's no gavel. But, he had his verbal gavel there. And at the same time...
And his yargle-bargle as well.
Yeah, argle-bargle, right. They covered it from argle to bargle. That's exactly right. But the point is that he did all of this with Trump and helped elect Trump. And now he's pseudo-mad at Trump for picking on CNN. He loves the publicity, just like Joe and Mika do.
I don't know.
And it's the stupidest thing to look at these media people on cable and say, I feel sorry for them.
Yes, that's
You're doing it to yourself.
They are. I don't know. I guess, I imagine he could be playing mad, but certainly, the Trump forces love to play mad.
It's wrestling.
At CNN too. Yeah. That's what
it's
made
all
the
fake.
clip so
It's fake news.
perfect.
He's absolutely right.
Yeah. I guess so. And at least at that level, they're not mad at each other, or they couldn't possibly really be mad at each other. They're the great, each other's greatest gift to one another.
Joe was even boasting on the show about how it improved his ratings.
Well, I'm no defender there. And by the way, even during the Mika Brzezinski thing, it's like, well, that's a terrible comment. However, Mika Brzezinski is terrible and doesn't deserve defense.
Well, the other side of the coin is it was a terrible comment. Look at my ratings.
Right. That's the problem. And I guess it does prove the old adage about, as dumb as it is, about all publicity being good publicity. I've always been.
Well, it's not helping CNN. CNN is running way, way behind the others in prime time. And so, the thing of it is, CNN is not being watched by Trump supporters because Trump tells his supporters that CNN is fake news. But CNN also puts on Jeffrey Lord, so they're not being watched by never-Trumpers.
Well, I don't know if the all publicity is good publicity formulation works if you're the publicity machine itself. There's no free media for CNN to earn. Even free media they give themselves is basically paid media because they could be lending it or selling it to somebody else. So they don't have the same benefits.
Right. My theme here is that CNN is making some major mistakes, but it's not the mistakes they think they're making. They thought they made a mistake with the story and fired the reporters. Their mistake was firing the reporters and supporting Trump.
Yes, among many other mistakes. But yeah, for the candidates and for the people who aren't the media structure themselves, it's hard to think that that the old adage didn't prevail, that any publicity is good publicity. I am always wary of putting dollar figures on free media because, you just got to pick a formula. And all that you really need to know is relative to other people, this one or that one got more airtime on the networks, and that's how you can figure it out. The dollar amount doesn't matter as much. But, Trump really did himself a huge favor. And this also, I think, goes back to the issue that the small c constitutional difference between Democrats and Republicans. Republicans are willing to say, in exchange for planting a Republican in the White House and possibly getting their policies signed into law, except for the fact that they can't manage to actually pass them into law. They can't formulate them. They can articulate them. They can't formulate them. They're willing to say, okay, if all publicity is good publicity and it's easier to get publicity by doing something dumb or terrible, if you're willing to be widely viewed inside the United States and around the world as the dumbest president ever, but that's okay with you just so long as you're one of the presidents. Dumbest president ever is still president. Can you stomach that? Sure, we can. And Democrats say, hell no, I don't want to be viewed. Do I want to be president if I'm going to be the worst, dumbest president ever? No, I want to be effective. I want to do things. I want to be viewed as as wise and smart and politically aware, because that's what my policies are all about. That's what we want out of politics, period. And okay, well, you can be the genius that loses, and we'll be the morons that win. That's fair. I'll take that deal every time, say Republicans.
And
Democrats,
they do.
Yeah, and they do, and it's awfully hard to convince Democrats. Well, I mean, right, honestly, what we're being handed as advice by people who refuse to call themselves Democrats. And it's okay to remain independent, but sometimes the advice is, well, maybe you should be stupid. Well, you know what? Maybe you are stupid. I don't know. How am I supposed to take that
Well, instead
advice?
of being stupid, how about being simple? It's not quite the same thing.
No, that's true. But, I guess, once again, eventually, if you can simply put forward your solid policy advice, you versus a clown.
I want to
says,
fix
I'm going to go on
Obamacare.
CNN
I don't
News.
want to repeal it.
Well, yeah,
That's pretty simple.
Yeah, it is. Right, I know.
I don't want you to take Medicaid away from people.
And
I don't
the
want
other
people to
guy
lose their
shows
insurance.
up on CNN with a whoopee cushion and a joy buzzer, and everybody
Yeah,
says,
exactly.
Hey, that's really funny. I think I'd rather watch that. No, are you kidding? That's idiotic. It's not going to do anything. It's actually going to kill you. It's going to hurt your health care. I mean, even if he does nothing, it's just going to, you're going to let the country deteriorate while this guy, does what? He's going to come on and
So let me cheer you up for the end of my segment.
Okay, fine.
Having depressed you for like 50 minutes.
Right, I got another
So
hour.
this is, I put this, I had it in there, but I put it right at the end of the list I sent you just so you could find it easy. It's, Americans' confidence in institutions is actually edging up under Trump.
What?
The average confidence in 14 major institutions this year is at 35% compared to 32% last year. And listen to what's up and what's down. Newspapers are up the most. Confidence in newspapers went from 20% in June 2016 to 27% now. I think that's entirely due to David Fahrenthold, so congratulations. Public schools up from 30 to 36. Banks are up from 27 to 32. Organized labor up 5 from 23 to 28. The Supreme Court 36 to 40. Criminal justice system 23 to 27. I don't know about that one. Congress is up 3 points from 9 to a whopping 12. Television news up 21 to 24. And big business up 18 to 21. Small business up 68 to 70. Notice small business is the second most respected of everything. The most respected is the military, which went down 1 point, 73 to 72. And the presidency went from 36 to 32. So the presidency goes down, and the newspapers and cable go up. Interestingly, the thing that is also low, news on the internet is at 16%, but there's nothing to compare it to because they didn't look at that last year.
Ah, okay.
Now, Republicans account for most of the increase in confidence this year, according to Gallup.
Oh.
So even Republicans have increased their confidence in newspapers.
I don't know how to take this news.
Yeah. So, if he keeps going, maybe he'll make newspapers popular again. Who knows?
But only among Republicans. Somehow. How did that happen? Did most of this rise in confidence?
Because,
not that
the
much,
fact of the matter is, he is, again, as we started with this segment, he's only appealing to his base. And his base is far from the majority. And no matter how loyal they are to him, it's far from the majority. I don't know how you can not make that point over and over and over again. What the base does doesn't matter. It's everybody else.
Well,
and it's losing everybody else.
Back to the problem of cable news, which covered the not the majority of the Tea Party as though they were the majority.
Exactly right. And that's why, I hear CNN's angst. Fix your own stuff.
Yeah. Well, I got a story for them. They can cover the guy who accidentally shot himself at Gettysburg the other day. That's up their alley.
Yeah, I suppose.
Cover the not the majority.
I'll take my leave while you cover that because time for me to scoot off to work. I'm
okay.
Already late because I was just enjoying talking to you so much. I lost track of time.
I enjoyed it too, and you can tell the kids that that might be waiting for you how much fun it was, and they'll support you, no doubt.
Totally. So with that, this is Greg Dworkin speaking with my good friend David Waldman Kagro in the morning. Enjoy talking to him 3 times a week. I do it on Mondays and Wednesdays and Thursdays, so I'll be back Wednesday. And we'll do it again. I'm sure news will happen. It seems to.
Yeah, I don't seem to be able to stop it.
Yeah, go to your July 4th parade and give your politicians a hard time. Take care, Absolutely. And I'll talk to you on Wednesday.
Okay, thanks very much, Greg. Take care. Give the kids lollipops. Give them the second one. I don't know whether doctors still do that occasionally. Anyway, it's probably not a good idea just to give the kids the sugar. The pediatricians I know switched over to stickers, although I do see some doctors now. They have some sort of like organic lollipops. I don't know how that could be. I guess all the ingredients in it might be organically sourced, but I know lollipops don't grow. So I'm fairly certain that they're not. It's not fair to say that they're organic in that sense. Anyway, that's obviously neither here nor there. Pretzels, okay. As Greg says that he gives out. Do you give out pretzels? These pretzels are making me thirsty. Stickers, yeah. See, okay. So he uses stickers. I guess that just sort of became an industry standard at that point. You can't do peanuts, that's for sure. Imagine that at a pediatrician's office. That's the Trump Care pediatrician's office. The peanuts and peanut brittle available for the morning, and Mountain Dew. Right? Okay. Well, anyway, I hinted at this other story. This would be right up the alley for Greg says that the peanuts, it's the allergist who gives out the peanuts. That's true. They do have to test you somehow, right? Why do science when you can just put out little packages of allergens and tell me how you feel? Anyway, I suggested that I had a story for the cable news networks, and I do. Lots of people following this one. I happened across it during the weekend. Apparently, another one. This is where our story begins. Another one of those confrontations between anti-fascist, as they like to call themselves, anti-fascist protester types, who are, I guess, known these days in certain circles anyway as Antifa, or I don't know, could they say Antifa, because anti-fascist, Antifa, A-N-T-I-F-A for short, anti-fascist forces, and let's see, Trump-supporting forces / militias / alt-right. It's really alt-right is probably the best encapsulation of it. Anti-fascist protesters versus alt-right protesters, and they've been sort of circling one another for some time, putting on this interesting pageant of planned confrontations. Very much, if the confrontations were more serious, you could compare it to some sort of drama like Gangs of New York that you might have seen on. Maybe you saw it in the theater. You have more time than I do. Or you saw it on cable, like I see all my movies. But these sort of planned combat confrontations, and they're stupid and mostly bogus, but they've been getting more serious, and we've touched on the fact that they've been occurring occasionally. And I have a few stories packed away and now deep down in the storage units beneath Pocket at some point about who's driving this stuff. But essentially, they are how do we even put this? They keep they're both arranging these things for real, and of course it's also a wide rumor market, a broad rumor market in whether or not these confrontations are going to happen. A couple of them have come off as planned. Now, you might say come off correctly, except it's incorrect of anybody to try to plan such things. But for the people who have decided to do it, it's worked a couple of times. In Berkeley, there was such a confrontation. We've seen them in a couple other cities. It's a weird thing. I mean, I understood it when it sort of popped up semi-organically, where some large anti-Trump protest was being staged, because, of course, there was a lot that went into the planning on some of the largest ones, the Women's March and various other protests that there was lots of publicity leading up to it. But to be honest, I mean, the Trump supporting alt-right isn't typically showing up at those. They're showing up at smaller protests. And, they find themselves getting into, first into yelling and then shoving matches, and then they began planning for actual fights where the alt-right side, to counter what they said they were seeing from the anti-fascist side, which was really face masks and occasional rock throwing at, usually, rock or brick throwing at businesses or whatever, or some other, not people, for instance, but some non-living symbolic entity would get the end of whatever anti-fascist violence there was. And then, of course, there was where it really took root was in protests outside venues where people like Milo Yiannopoulos or Ann Coulter or other inflammatory jackasses were speaking on campuses. And the alt-right counter-protest sort of arose in reaction to the protests against their speakers. And so most of the activity took place around a speaking event at some place, and then they began sort of doing them independently of any speaker. They just decided to have certain, like the Berkeley thing, I guess they must have found out about some sort of rally at which anti-fascist forces were going to be present, and they staged this confrontation. Anyway, the point is that they've been doing this all over the place and doing it frequently enough that there's a robust market in hoaxing this sort of thing. And apparently, somewhere along the line, it began circulating in alt-right circles, that anti-fascist forces were planning to show up for some sort of a protest at the Gettysburg National Monument, the battlefield, and for what reason, I don't know, over the July 4th weekend, in particular, July 1st, Saturday. And for what reason, no one is entirely sure. And I guess the rumors that were circulating were that they were going to show up at this battlefield, and I don't even know whether they made this explicit in their rumor mongering, but I guess the idea was they were going to show up and maybe hold some kind of a protest against perhaps Confederate flag usage in general, or Confederate, I don't know what, the entire idea of the Confederacy. I mean, it was weird because the idea being circulated, they were going to come and protest, and in some fashion, this is what really was supposed to rally their troops, desecrate graves. There are, of course, graves at Gettysburg. Why you would pick Gettysburg, of all places, to do this, and maybe it's just this is the most famous Civil War battleground I could think of, but you might, I don't know, I guess if there were really such a protest being planned among anti-fascists, they might have perhaps picked a battle in which the Confederacy had prevailed. Fewer choices, I guess, in terms of well-known national monuments there. But certainly any place you show up, any battlefield, Civil War battlefield, there will be Confederate somethings to desecrate, and I guess they thought that the most famous one and the one near us, where we live or whatever, where we can find our Trump people to show up, Gettysburg would be it. And Gettysburg was, of course, fought during that period of the year, the July 1st through 4th period, back in its day. But so there's also heightened activity around the Gettysburg area, or maybe even lots of Trump people who were going to be there anyway, perhaps for battle reenactments, and they thought, what a convenient way to ride. Here's something else. You can also have a fight with anti-fascists while you're there, and maybe even hit them with your reproduction rifle butt, if you like. I don't know. So for whatever reason, they decided to circulate the rumor that there was going to be such a protest. And therefore, the only way to counter that was for all of the alt-right types to show up and be ready to beat up anti-fascists. Well, anyway, nobody showed up because, one, it was a rumor, and two, just really, honestly, the anti-fascist forces, to the extent I think that they really exist as an organized unit, they don't. But they don't typically haul themselves out into the distant countryside for confrontations. They're city-based. They're urban dwellers for the most part, and their activity is likely to be urban and remain urban forever. Everyone everywhere should be anti-fascist, of course, but not necessarily in the Antifa sense. But I've never seen anything indicating that they would haul themselves out into the countryside of Gettysburg or any place like it in order to do anything like this. So it's a very unlikely rumor, but they're not fact checkers. The alt-right. That if they were, they wouldn't be doing what they're doing. So at any rate, almost no, or perhaps actually zero anti-fascist forces showed up out there. But a handful of alt-right pro-Trump counter-protesters, except that there was nothing to counter, showed up. And interestingly, many of them came, of course, because, with Confederate flags. And I wonder it was probably some mix of people who, it's really hard to even say, that, like, for instance, that they're genuinely interested in what they're doing, whatever it is, with their Confederate flags. They're not really genuine neo-Confederates very often. They're just, F you can't tell me what to do, and, or, if you're talking about your basic country boy kind of thing, this flag represents my rebel spirit, by which I mean I don't listen to people and I take bad advice, and you can't tell me not to meddle in opioids or whatever it is that they happen to spend their time on. Or, that I'm taking the day off from farmersonly.com and I'm going to go out and show my rebellious spirit. And I know that this flag has been around since I've been around, and maybe not much longer, and I don't care the fact that this is a new phenomenon, waving the Confederate flags, but it's just sort of a bad boy symbol, and it's on my Harley, so what the heck, right? So there's not much more to it than that. They're not neo-Confederates necessarily. And by the same token, you also have people sort of faking it even worse on the alt-right, who simply say, I have no connection to the Confederate South. Some of these people up north, same thing. There's good old boys up north too, and they adopt the Confederate flag just as easily. As stupid as that is, and as nonsensical as it is, it's not really something that they even bother connecting with the Confederacy. It's just either rebellious spirit or inherent racism. And, I know this makes, the people I'm racist against mad when I fly this. And by the same token, you got alt-right people who say, I don't even care who I'm getting mad necessarily, just so long as they're liberal. And I know that this flag will do the trick, and so that's all I'm interested in. I found out this thing makes liberals mad, so I'm going to fly it. I literally am doing it only for that reason. So there's a lot of that too. And so you found yourselves in Gettysburg over the weekend with lots of Confederate flags flying, and it's a funny thing. It's like open carry in some of the new open carry states, where the idea was we're going to get people used to it. In Gettysburg, you'd think, okay, Gettysburg, of all places, like, they should be the most anti-Confederate. But they've gotten used to the fact that people come and fly Confederate flags there because that's the history of the place. There's lots of reenactments, etc. So it's not always 100% clear right away what's going on when someone's flying a Confederate flag. Anyway, so lots of them showed up with that. They rode there was a lot of motorcycle activity riding through the city, some of which flying American flags, some flying Confederate flags, some flying both, and then a bunch of alt-right protesters. And the one I'm interested in showed up and had a flag of some kind, though it's not reported which flag it was that he was flying. Could have been an American flag, could have been a Confederate flag, we don't know. But anyway, Benjamin Hornberger, a young man from who lists Shippensburg, Pennsylvania as his hometown. It says of Shippensburg. I'm not certain that he lives there currently because it's later reported as being his hometown. Showed up with his flag and his gun because open carry. Now, Pennsylvania, long story, I guess, we'll make it short. Pennsylvania, not often listed among the official open carry states, if you follow such things. But apparently the state of the law in Pennsylvania is such that the law is, in fact, silent on open carry. It's very explicit about what the requirements are for concealed carry, but it doesn't speak to open carry, and it's it's recently been interpreted to mean that there's no additional requirements for open carry and no specific prohibition against open carry. So by default, it's kind of an open carry state, but most carriers just don't treat it that way for whatever reason. Anyhow, so he showed up and he thought, well, one, I'll bring my open carry gun because I can, and so therefore I'm exercising my Second Amendment rights, and I'll bring this flag and I'll come and protest and exercise my First Amendment rights as well. And if I have a gun on me, well, so much the better. When the hordes of anti-fascist protesters come and try and throw a brick at me, I'll shoot them all, I guess was his plan. Well, it didn't go according to plan. And at some point, he decides, I guess he's so fatigued from his patriotism and holding his American flag that he goes to rest it against his hip to sort of take the burden off of his powerful alpha male arms, I guess. And the pole, I assume, slips at some point and it catches the trigger of a revolver he's got in a leg holster. By the way, a leg holster, not the hip holster, but the leg holster. So he looks tactical and cool. He's got it in a leg holster, and he shoots himself in the leg, which is, I guess, this is why I'm taking so much time with this one, the most American thing, or maybe even the most alt-right thing possibly ever devised. The guy actually basically shot himself with his flag. And I don't know, I'd love to be able to say whether it was an American flag or a Confederate flag, and I'm not sure which story is better. But he shot himself with this protest flag, showing up to protest a non-existent anti-fascist protest that never materialized because he heard a rumor about it on the pro-Trump internet. Can you think of anything better? I don't know. Anyway, as it turns out, by the way, he shot himself in the leg, but, you can do some serious damage and bleed out, especially out in the middle of the fields in Gettysburg. Luckily, in July 1st through the 3rd in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, there's typically ambulances nearby anyway, because every year somebody needs an ambulance, not because they accidentally shoot themselves, because they voluntarily march around in the July heat in the middle of a field in woolen uniforms 150 years out of date and pass out from heat exhaustion. So luckily there were some ambulances nearby, and also the U.S. Park Police, the federales, ladies and gentlemen, the federally funded, jackbooted thugs saved the guy's life because he shot himself through the leg, and you can sever your femoral artery pretty easily that way. And apparently they were on hand to apply a tourniquet, which may have saved the man's life, and were able to cart him off, and I guess he'll live to protest armed for no particular reason again. Now, the article originally actually caught my eye because it was titled and was being tweeted around by writers for Penn Live, the PennLive.com website, which is a consortium of the real newspapers in Pennsylvania. I found it really interesting that they were running this title and tweeting this stuff and referring to Antifa in a way that the alt-right folks typically do. And I was surprised, how could this get a headline on Penn Live this way? And the headline read, "Armed Patriot accidentally shoots self in leg," funny enough, "at Gettysburg battlefield." And then there were lots of pictures, but lots of references to the patriots who had showed up armed. And I found that very interesting. Why are these people referred to as patriots? And the other side, which didn't even materialize, referred to as Antifa. And as it turns out, the reporter was kind of shaken by the responses that she got, and went back and corrected and said, I think I was moving sloppily and too fast. I should have been calling them, self-described patriots. But really, honestly, why even bother that? That's the description they give of themselves. But I should instruct anti-fascist protesters. You should start calling yourselves patriots instead, and see if they describe you as self-described patriots. I bet they won't. But, so she went back anyway, the writer did. The writer's name is Christine Vendel, and then going back and putting quotes around patriot and trying to stick in like self-described, etc. But I don't see why you should even do them that favor, especially since there were plenty of pictures of them at the site, and guess what? They're waving Confederate flags. Patriots don't wave Confederate flags. That's the flag of the enemy. That's the rebel flag. And I know everybody thinks, a lot of people on that side they don't even think about the politics of it per se, just the rebelliousness of it all. But there's nothing patriotic about that anywhere, for one thing, and much less so at the Gettysburg National Monument. This is a celebration of a great Union victory that turned the tide of the war. Confederates, to the extent they're there at all, ought to be, I don't know if you want to even say welcomed to the site, but they ought to be regarded as the defeated enemy there, and that's just the historical record, not to mention what a real patriot would think of people representing themselves as Civil War rebels. Anyway, the story is interesting enough all by itself, but it raised a couple of issues. One, of course, the idea of these self-described patriots. And here, just pulling a paragraph from the piece here. Dozens of self-described now patriots came to the park about noon Saturday after hearing rumors that Antifa protesters, and I mean, that's kind of a key word there, that you would use that in your reporting is odd. I mean, she got that story from them. And I don't know how balanced a reporter she is. She was appropriately apologetic about having oversimplified the patriot issue. But my guess is that in looking around, well, for one thing, I guess there were no anti-fascist protesters present to interview anyway. So she ended up interviewing the people who were there saying that they were patriots, and then although she eventually described them as self-described patriots, the only story she got was from them, and that was because they were the only ones to show up. And I don't know, that doesn't really get reflected, I don't think, in the way the article is written. I think they should have been much more clear about the fact that, A, nobody showed, and B, nobody showed because it was an internet rumor, and C, why would there be such an internet rumor? Well, that's too much investigation, I think, for the local reporter. Just doesn't happen. So dozens of self-described patriots, came to the park about noon Saturday after hearing rumors that Antifa protesters might crash the park's events and try to desecrate memorials. The events, of course, reenactments for the anniversary of the battle. Now, the idea of city-dwelling anti-fascist black bloc anarchist-type protesters hauling themselves out to Gettysburg to disrupt historical reenactments of the battle, and then to desecrate memorials. It sounds pretty far-fetched, but it was enough to make their blood boil, so they decided to come out with guns and shoot themselves. Members of the Antifa caused a ruckus in Harrisburg recently. Now, that's the same state, so red alert. They caused a ruckus in Harrisburg recently at an anti-Sharia rally, which is equally stupid, but they showed up because there was a stupid actual alt-right event going on, protesting nothing in particular, and they just showed up to cause a ruckus because idiots protesting things that don't exist were there in their city, and they figured they might as well show up and make fun of them. Members of the Antifa caused a ruckus in Harrisburg recently at this anti-Sharia rally, and one member was arrested for swinging a wooden pole with a nail attached at a police horse. You don't want to do that, but okay. The rumors on Saturday appeared to be just that, rumors, as no Antifa members were seen at Gettysburg Park Saturday. Instead, there were dozens of men in camouflage outfits, some carrying long rifles or handguns or both, milling about the park holding large American flags, neglecting to mention those that were holding Confederate flags. I guess they walked outside of the perimeter of the fenced-in, officially designated demonstration areas, which were nearly empty all day. So the U.S. Park Police ended up with this rumor, spending real time and real dollars, setting up protest zones for a protest that wasn't happening. It was a figment of the imagination of somebody, although no one will lay claim to it. The alt-right people who circulated it say we only circulated it because we heard that the anti-fascist people were circulating their own rumors, and now there's all sorts of it's now developed to the level where people have conspiracy theories that it was an anti-fascist group posing as a alt-right group that posted the rumors so that they would be we've got all kinds of, now we have false flag accusations going on as between these two non-existent groups over non-existent protests that grew up or real life accidents that happened because people believed that the fake protests being planted by the false flag guys. You can see how convoluted this gets. So they all showed up in camouflage instead. Congratulations. We have the reporting here that says a handful of members from the real 3% Risen group here. It's no longer enough to just say I'm from the 3%ers. There's splinter factions of 3%ers that call themselves things like the real 3%ers or the real 3% Risen group. You see, it's zombie real 3%ers. Splinter of a splinter. Sat in one fenced area wearing Confederate flag hats and T-shirts, while a lone man with a sign aligning the Confederate flag with slavery and racism sat alone in another fenced area. And outside of the fenced area, two groups, one group showed up in support of the couple of people sitting inside the fences over there, but they didn't mix with them. This is a very splintered faction over here. And one guy actually correctly aligning the Confederate flag with slavery and racism, and no anti-fascists whatsoever to show up for that guy. It's a very, it's a very weird and convoluted thing. There's lots of deep meaning to be parsed out of it. But I'm not even certain it's worth the time. There's just not, to go even further than this. This is worth it up to now. I'm willing to own it to this point. But what a situation. Although one thing that I think made the story even more popular, the one that really makes it cable newsworthy, is of course what we learned, that the name of the man who accidentally shot himself, Benjamin Hornberger, again, age 23 of Shippensburg, is a relatively a Hornberger. That's not the most common last name in the world, right? Can we find out anything about this guy? Well, of course, if you go and you Google things, you pretty quickly turn up Ben Hornberger, and these reports, mostly from overseas outlets because it was reported by the French press agency, AFP, and carried in newspapers around the world, but not so much in this country. Here is, I got a screen grab and I put it side by side saying, gee whiz, I wonder if this is the same fellow here. Here's the story, a profile of Ben Hornberger, one of Trump's army of volunteers. And he's pictured beneath, the photo illustrating the article here, standing in the bed of his pickup truck with an American flag and a Trump Make America Great Again flag flying from the rear of the truck, and also, of course, all of the decals on the rear window of his truck, which I guess, I don't know whether they bothered to examine exactly what they were, but they do include some rather raw sentiments, let's say, in the stickers and decals that are displayed there. But Benjamin Hornberger is only 22, it says in this earlier AFP piece. Anyway, the ages align, obviously. Benjamin Hornberger is only 22, but not too young for a little grandiloquence. The 2016 presidential election, he says, is really do or die. And now he goes on to, profess his great admiration for Donald Trump, etc. That establishes the fact that, a pro-Trump alt-righter sort of guy decided to show up local and protect the monuments from the non-existent anti-fascist protesters and shot himself. It does make it even more perfect that he happens to be a Trump supporter at that. But you'll also find lots more information about a Pennsylvanian, Ben Hornberger, of the same age, 22 years old, now 23 years old. It's not entirely clear that it's the same guy, but there is such a Ben Hornberger who is involved in the Pennsylvania State Republican Party, who likewise is a former Marine, and how long could he have been in the Marines for if he's 23 and out? But, maybe enlisted when he was 18 and spent your standard rotation in the Marines and then left because he was so totally dedicated to serving in the armed forces. Or, maybe he's saved his college money and is waiting to go. I don't know. Not certain what his story is, but appears to be the same guy, and joined up with the Trump campaign in Pennsylvania as a sort of as a county coordinator for the local veterans. Not exactly, the longtime veteran you might hope for, but maybe if he was reaching out to young veterans, I'm sure that he made for a great liaison, maybe somewhat hampered in his work now by having to deal with this gunshot wound. But there's also the aspect of all of this that's just a straight-up gun fail story that, once again, your military training doesn't appear to have much to do with your daily carry situation. And even though they use as an excuse, how can you deny the right to protect yourself and to carry a weapon to somebody who's been trained in using weapons to defend American democracy, et cetera, et cetera? And the answer is, I'm sure he's really good with a standard service weapon and dealing with all the rules and regulations about where and when you can carry them and in what condition. But there's been no training in carrying sidearms with a leg holster in a civilian setting where you're also carrying a flagpole, because if there had been, he wouldn't have shot himself, or at least that's what we're supposed to believe, that when people get training on gun safety, they'll actually execute that training when they're out in public. That's so rarely the case, it's hardly even worth mentioning. All right, let's see. Other interesting... Is there any more interesting angles on this story? Probably not. It's just we've exhausted this story, but it's getting an awful lot of attention, and it's just too perfect, the juxtaposition. So I suppose investigative reporters will have to tell us whether or not it's the right guy. But don't bother him or anything. He's got enough on his mind, trying to recover from his leg wound. But it just made for an interesting weekend, to say the least. All right, so let's see. There was the interesting story of Chris Christie on the beach, the guy who shot himself in the leg at Gettysburg, the stupid video of the wrestling stuff from Trump. What else have we from the weekend? Are we caught up with the weekend stuff? I think so. Now we can get to a little bit of the other reported issues, some interesting articles to share, some interesting observations made by other folks on Twitter, etc. Let's see. Here we go. How about a story of same old about Donald Trump? Do we have room for something like that? I know that we have a constant hunger for these things. NPR over, actually, this came to me over the weekend, but it's actually quite an old story. I can't believe that we've missed this one to date. The story is actually from January of 2017, right around transition time. How come it took so long to reach me? I'm not sure, but it came with the comment, basically same old story with Trump. We're doing the same thing all over again. Headline here, Trump DC hotel contractors say they're owed millions. The hotel emolumentum, as we're now calling it, once again built on thievery and giveaways from the government as well. In late October, this piece begins. Jackie Northam writing this piece for NPR. In late October, just weeks ahead of the election, President-elect Donald Trump made a quick detour to Washington for the official opening of his new five-star hotel just a few blocks from the White House. We all remember that. During a ribbon-cutting ceremony, Trump told the crowd that the 2-year, roughly $200 million renovation project at the historic old post office building was done ahead of schedule and under budget, thanks to what he called an incredible team of people, including hundreds of construction workers, electricians, maintenance workers, and so many others who helped make this project a reality. They're the really important ones in all this. Get it? So how did he do it? How does he pull off the economic miracle of coming in under budget? Well, now some of those companies would like final payment for their work. Documents obtained by NPR show 3 Washington area companies have filed liens against the Trump International Hotel, totaling more than $5 million. One company, Joseph J. Magnolia Incorporated, filed a $2.98 million mechanics lien in December. According to the filing, the firm worked on the hotel from September 2014 to December of 2016 and completed all plumbing, mechanical, and HVAC work along with site sewer, water, storm, and water services. AES Electrical Incorporated, based in Laurel, Maryland, says it's owed $2.075 million. At that point, can't you just say $2,075,000? All right. For its work on, or you can just say just over $2 million, for its work on the hotel in the same period. Sterling, Virginia, based A&D Construction filed a lien in November saying it was owed $79,700. The firm's lawyer, Richard Sisman, says A&D is a small Hispanic-owned company that was subcontracting on the Trump Hotel project. The nature of the work was trim and casework and architectural millwork, wall, base, crown molding. This is all fine carpentry, he says. Sisman says A&D's lien is relatively small compared to the other two, but it's a lot of money to his client. On these big jobs, these should be paid. It's ridiculous that a small-time operator, and remember, Greg told us the astounding respect that Americans have for small business, right? And astoundingly little respect for Donald Trump. And yet, what's amazing is he gets to keep all the money and they don't get paid for their hard work that they did. And I have no doubt that it was, in fact, hard work. But even if it wasn't particularly hard, it was work. And Mr. Billionaire can't part with $79,000 for the people who made his hotel, and he was thanking at the opening ceremony. And here's America saying that all their respect is with small business and none of it with Donald Trump. But that doesn't change where the money lies, does it? Trump has faced many liens and lawsuits for alleged non-payment for work in the past. Stephen Schooner, a contract specialist with the George Washington University Law School, says resolving the liens in this case could ultimately involve the federal government because it holds the lease on the building where the Trump Hotel is located. But remember that the GSA and others involved in this whole thing have been instead spending their time since inauguration whitewashing the whole thing. Not only is there no conflict of interest, even though in black and white it says this damn place can't be leased by a government employee, and obviously the President of the United States is public employee number one, but that's okay with them. And secondly, on top of it all, the President's, or the White House, of course, saying there's no such thing as a conflict of interest for the President, period. And so now we get all of this on top of it all. They're going to be the arbiters of these mechanics liens as well. And, you know, it's one thing to say, well, no government employee can own this place or be involved in this contract. And then, I mean, it's incredible to even think of the idea of waiving that for the presidency. But on the other hand, I mean, part of the point of these mechanics liens is, you don't own this yet, exactly, really, because there are very few places in which the law gives the workman any kind of serious leverage against the property owners. That's just one of our stupid little traditions, but this one is one of them. And, you can't perfect ownership of this operation so long as these mechanics liens are out there. But I don't know, for whatever reason, people don't take them particularly seriously. We think of this as, this is Trump's property. It's his hotel. One, he's leasing it. But even if that wasn't the case, if he owned it outright, or what we like to think of as owning it outright, it's not done. It's not a done deal. You haven't paid the people who made this the valuable property it is. And, you know, we do give the workmen this kind of leverage here. I don't know. We just don't give it the respect it deserves. Anyway, I mean, the real way of dealing with something like this and getting an impact is saying, no, the hotel's closed, and the profits of the hotels, you know, why aren't the revenues being garnished and the workmen being paid from that? He keeps bragging about how much money his hotel is taking in and how much it's making, and talking about donating some of it to the Treasury or to other charities because it comes from foreign entities, and he's never going to live up to that either. But how about this? How about pay the workmen with that money? Nobody's apparently very interested in making him do that. Why not? How come we can't get that working? Anyway, the way the lease is structured, the article goes on to say, it said that, I guess the government entities here said they may step in and discharge the lien, but they're not actually required to, says Stephen Schooner, the contracts professor at GW Law School. Still, Schooner says, as a rule, the government wants its tenants, like Trump International Hotel, to solve its own problems. Requests for comment from the Trump communications team about the liens were not returned, and I guess haven't been returned at all since January either. No developments, and no further developments in that I can see. Let's see. What other items do we want to bring up from the last couple of days? Oh, you know who? I know that there was, let's see, there's a couple of other stories here that I think were interesting. Ah, yes, right before we, or just as we signed off for the weekend, there was news of the Chris Kobach headed, nominally Chris Kobach headed, and I guess officially headed by Mike Pence. Oddly enough, the Presidential Commission on Election Integrity. I believe we made mention of it during the Friday program. And their interest in getting from all 50 states all of the voter registration information, but including party affiliation, if any, voter history where it's kept, and including, believe it or not, the last 4 digits of the Social Security numbers of these people as well. State by state, there have been resistance from the Secretary of State and other officials in various states just saying, look, we're not going to comply with this. This is an outrageous request. By the afternoon, Sarah Huckabee Sanders had stepped up to the mic in the White House to say that all of this non-compliance, all of these refusals to comply with these requests were really just political grandstanding. It's a stunt. They're just looking for publicity, which is, of course, how Trump got elected, but never mind all of that. And it's to be ignored. It's stupid, and it's just partisan point scoring. But see, that also became kind of difficult to deal with and a little awkward because I don't know the chronology of it. It was either immediately before or immediately afterwards when Kansas announced that it would not be sharing, at the very least, would not be sharing the Social Security numbers of their registered voters with the federal government. And that is super awkward because, of course, the Secretary of State of Kansas is Chris Kobach. So how do you explain that one, Sarah? I don't know. I haven't talked to the president about it. So there's your answer. I just gave you the answer. That could even be my imitation of Sarah Huckabee Sanders at the microphone. I don't know. Well, okay, her voice isn't quite that low. I'll have to work on that imitation. Anyway, how do you explain the fact that the chairman, or not, I don't even know what his position actually is with this commission? Because again, technically, Mike Pence is the chair of this commission. I don't know whether Kobach is the co-chair or vice chair or any kind of chair whatsoever, but he's clearly involved in this. This was his idea, and he's leading this thing. So how do you explain that he won't even comply with it? And by the way, Mike Pence's state of Indiana also not in compliance, though at least he's not the Secretary of State there. So I don't know. I don't know how you're going to reconcile that, but who cares, right? They just go out there and continue to lie about whatever, and we'll do nothing about it. All right. Let's see. Other interesting stuff that we could collect, or comments that were made over the weekend. Here's a random one, just to sort of shift gears. I definitely want to get this one on the record. Dana Hool with this observation. It was part of a longer tweet storm, but I just wanted to throw this one out there. You remember when we read when it first came out, the transcript of the discussion between Paul Ryan and Kevin McCarthy and some of the other members of the Republican House leadership, when they were secretly, I don't even really know how it happened, taped, discussing, among other things, that they were aware, and this was in June of 2016, that they had been aware of, or being made aware of, by meeting with Ukrainian officials, aware of Russia's record of interference in the free elections in Ukraine and elsewhere in Europe, and that this was a widespread problem, and that they regarded it as very serious, and that it was, how did they put it? I can't remember what the words were that they were using to describe just how bad the situation was there, and that McCarthy was then, afterwards he tried to explain it away as some sort of a joke, because there was laughter, although it was really more of like shocked, outraged laughter, if you ask me, about his assertion that, you know what, I think the Russians they own Dana Rohrabacher, and I think they own Trump too. And everybody has that sort of outraged, nervous laughter about it. Well, this is an observation based off of that. Now that we've had further developments, and we really we need to lay the background down on some of these things too. But you would likely have heard by now the breaking story of Friday afternoon into Saturday. More reporting on possible evidence of, more solid evidence of collusion between people connected with the Trump campaign. Remember Peter Smith and the Peter Smith story. Further explanations of what it was Peter Smith was likely doing in poking around in the dark web looking for Russian hackers that he believed were in possession of Hillary Clinton's emails from her private server. And there's even more information about that. And Dana's comment gives us good entree into it, but he was pointing out that when we learned back a couple of months ago that about the recorded conversation here, one of the things that struck me, of course, as most amazing about that conversation was that they're telling us now that what Ryan's comments and McCarthy's comments were, that they knew already in June that the Russians were in the habit of interfering in free democratic elections in the West, and they suspected that they had, in fact, gotten to Trump in all of this. What was amazing to me at the time was they knew and they did nothing. But what Dana adds to the observation is they knew and they did nothing, and that means something in particular. In other words, why weren't these high officials in the United States government, who are elected officials, who were standing for election at the time themselves? I mean, just even as between Ryan and McCarthy, all of those guys who are House members, obviously they stand for election every 2 years. We know that. They were up for election. It's June of 2016. Their entire careers are on the line, allegedly, theoretically. They're up for election in just a few months. And they're alleging that they know that Russians are meddling in Western democratic elections all the time. Why would they be meddling in them? To try and manipulate the outcome. Why would they be trying to manipulate the outcome? Yet to undermine the integrity of Americans' elections and our confidence in our own system. So here are people who are top elected officials in the United States government who would ordinarily, you would think, if the Russians are simply out to undermine America, period, you would be trying to undermine the re-elections of its top leaders, right? To disrupt the system as much as possible. But what's missing from the discussion is any sense of worry of any kind, not even an inkling of doubt anywhere in this conversation. Why aren't Ryan, McCarthy, and others worried that their elections would be in jeopardy? After all, the Russians are meddling in American elections and Western elections all over the place. These guys are the top leadership of the American government. Why don't they even give any hint that they think that there's a risk to their own positions? It's rather amazing, and it'll leave you probably in some stunned silence there for a minute, too. Obviously, not only does this conversation mean they knew this was going on and did nothing, but more to the point, they knew that this was going on and they did nothing because they knew they had already had their assurances that the Russian meddling wasn't to undermine the American government. It was to undermine the Democratic Party, and they weren't Democrats. And that's why they did nothing. That's the answer. It's as partisan as it could possibly be. Otherwise, they should have had their hair on fire. They were the ones who ordinarily would have stood to lose it all in the face of a Russian attack on America. But it wasn't a Russian attack on America. It was a Russian attack on the Democratic Party in America. Why do they prefer Republican Party? That's odd. That's weird. You wouldn't ordinarily see that as being the case. But I guess the fact that Trump was clearly either at that point the nominee or about to become the nominee changes the calculations for the Russians. And these American officials know it, and they smile at it. We love it, thank God, because personally for me it means I can continue to stay here and continue in my position and profit as I have done before, and perhaps even at a greater clip than before. My position is even more solidified because the Russians are working for my continuance in office and to defeat my enemies, and I'm okay with that because I win. That is pretty astounding. That's pretty outrageous and deserves some more attention, I think. Okay, so what did happen over the weekend that furthered the story? We really ought to enter that into the record as well, and we can spend the rest of the week discussing how that shakes out. Where is the rest of this stuff, and how come it's not immediately apparent to me? All right, well, here we are. It's in the Lawfare blog, and they had brought us the most interesting insight on Friday, I think, when they spoke to the author of the piece in the Wall Street Journal that broke the story of Peter Smith's involvement in all this. And this is another take on another angle, but also published in Lawfare. Matt Tate is the writer here of The Time I Got Recruited to Collude with the Russians. Again, this is something you may have already read over the weekend, but sort of needs to be entered onto the record and commented upon in the closing minutes of today's show. Matt Tate is not a lawyer, but a computer technician. But they brought him in for this specific guest piece so that he could add his take on things and his angle on things. I read the Wall Street Journal article yesterday. He says, on attempts by a GOP operative to recover the missing Hillary Clinton emails with more than usual interest, I was involved in the events that reporter Shane Harris described, and I was an unnamed source for the initial story. What's more, I was named in and provided the documents to Harris that formed the basis of the evening's follow-up story, which reported that a longtime Republican activist who led an operation hoping to obtain Hillary Clinton emails from hackers listed senior members of the Trump campaign, including some who now serve as top aides in the White House, in a recruitment document for his effort. You'll recall that on Friday we had already heard that what's his name? I've already lost track of Peter Smith. There we go. Is it Smith? Now I'm like, that can't be his name, right? I think I already have got it wrong. I've lost that part of the track of the story. Anyway, what was most interesting was he was dropping the name of Mike Flynn when he was talking to the hackers about getting a hold of these emails. I'm working with Mike Flynn. And as it turns out, he's dropped a few more names along the way. Officials identified the document include Steve Bannon, now chief strategist for Donald Trump, Kellyanne Conway, you know her, Sam Clovis, a policy advisor to the Trump campaign, and now senior advisor to the Agriculture Department, and of course Mike Flynn. plus his son. I'm writing this piece, Matt says, in the spirit of Benjamin Whitty's account of his interactions with James Comey, immediately following the New York Times story for which he acted as a source. The goal is to provide a fuller accounting of experiences which were thoroughly bizarre and which I didn't fully understand until I read the Journal's account of the episode yesterday. Indeed, I still do not fully understand the events I'm going to describe, both what they reflected then or what they mean in retrospect, but I can lay out what happened, facts from which readers and investigators can draw their own conclusions. For the purpose of what follows, I'll assume readers are already familiar with the Wall Street Journal's reporting on the matter. My role in the events began last spring when I spent a great deal of time studying the series of Freedom of Information disclosures by the State Department of Hillary Clinton's emails and posting the parts I found most interesting, especially those relevant to computer security on my public Twitter account. I was doing this not because I'm some particular foe of Clinton's, I'm not, but because, like everyone else, I assumed she was likely to become the next president of the United States, and I believed her emails might provide some insight into key cybersecurity and national security issues when she was elected in November. A while later, on June 14th, the Washington Post reported on a hack of the DNC, ostensibly by Russian intelligence. When material from this hack began appearing online, courtesy of the Guccifer 2 online persona, I turned my attention to looking at these stolen documents, and this time my purpose was to try and understand who broke into the DNC and why. A few weeks later, right around the time the DNC emails were dumped by WikiLeaks, and curiously, around the same time Trump called for the Russians to get Hillary Clinton's missing emails, I was contacted out of the blue by a man named Peter Smith. Yay, I remembered it correctly. It's all of a sudden it seemed so obviously fake, like a fake-sounding name. That can't be right. So he gets contacted by Peter Smith, who had seen my work going through these emails. Smith implied that he was a well-connected Republican political operative. Right? Comports with the previous story. Initially, I assumed the query must have been about my work on the DNC hack. After all, few people followed my account prior to the DNC breach, whereas my analysis of the break-in at the DNC had received considerably more coverage. I assumed his query about the Clinton emails was therefore a mistake, and that he meant instead to talk to me about the emails stolen from the DNC. So I agreed to talk to him, thinking that whatever my views on then-candidate Trump, if a national campaign wanted an independent, nonpartisan view of the facts surrounding the case, I should provide it to the best of my ability. Yet Smith had not contacted me about the DNC hack, but rather about his conviction that Clinton's private email server had been hacked, in his view almost certainly by both the Russian government and likely multiple other hackers too, and his desire to ensure that the fruits of those hacks were exposed prior to the election. Over the course of a long phone call, he mentioned that he had been contacted by someone on the dark web who claimed to have a copy of emails from Secretary Clinton's private server, and this was why he had contacted me. He wanted me to help validate whether or not the emails were genuine. Under other circumstances, I would have gone no further. After all, this was occurring in the final stretch of a U.S. presidential election, and I did not feel comfortable and had no interest in providing material help to either of the campaigns beyond merely answering questions on my already public analysis of Clinton's emails or of the DNC hack. I'm not a U.S. citizen or resident, after all. In any case, my suspicion then and now was that Hillary Clinton's email server was likely never breached by Russia, and moreover, that if Russia had a copy of Clinton's emails, they would not waste them in the run-up to an election she was likely to win. I thus thought Smith's search for her emails was in vain. But following the DNC hack and watching the Russian influence campaign surrounding it unfold in near real time, Smith's comment about having been contacted by someone from the dark web claiming to have Clinton's personal emails struck me as critically important. I wanted to find out whether this person was merely some fraudster wanting to take Smith for a ride or something more sinister. That is, whether Smith had been contacted by Russian intelligence fronts with the intent to use Smith as part of their scheme by laundering real or forged documents. I never found out who Smith's contact on the dark web was. He's dead. I add that. It was never clear to me whether this person was merely someone trying to dupe Smith out of his money or a Russian front, and it was never clear to me how they represented their own credentials to Smith. Over the course of our conversations, one thing struck me as particularly disturbing. Smith and I talked several times about the DNC hack, and I expressed my view that the hack had likely been orchestrated by Russia and that the Kremlin was using the stolen documents as part of an influence campaign against the United States. Wrong, it was against the Democratic Party in the United States, but okay. I explained that if someone had contacted him via the dark web with Clinton's personal emails, he should take very seriously the possibility that this may have been part of a wider Russian campaign against the United States. And I said he needed not take my word for it, pointing to a number of occasions where U.S. officials had made it clear that this was the view of the U.S. intelligence community as well. Smith, however, did not seem to care. From his perspective, it didn't matter who had taken the emails or their motives for doing so. He never expressed to me any discomfort with the possibility that the emails he was seeking were potentially from a Russian front, a likelihood he was happy to acknowledge. If they were genuine, they would hurt Clinton's chances and therefore help Trump. When he first contacted me, I didn't know who Smith was, but his legitimate connections within the Republican Party were apparent. My motive for initially speaking to him was that I wondered if the campaign was trying to urgently establish whether the claims Russia had hacked the DNC was merely spin from the Clinton campaign, or instead something they would need to address before Trump went far down the road of denying it. My guess was that maybe they wanted to contact someone who would provide them with impartial advice to understand whether the claims were real or just rhetoric. Although it wasn't initially clear to me how independent Smith's operation was from Flynn or the Trump campaign, it was immediately apparent that Smith was both well-connected and he seemed to know both Flynn and his son well. Smith routinely talked about the goings-on at the top of the Trump team, offering deep insights into the bizarre world at the top of the Trump campaign. He has lots to say about that. We don't get time to, we won't have time at this point to finish up. You should read the article by all means, but I think all the key points have been made. Once again, this jibes very well with the observation that Dana made here. In other words, that Republicans were, well in advance of all of this stuff happening, quite well aware of how interested the Russians were in meddling in the democracies of Western governments, including the United States, and that all of this would, by design, inure to the benefit of the Republican Party, its nominee, and its candidates, by damaging the chances of Democrats. Yes, it was an attack against American democracy. Yes, it should be viewed in that light by an actual patriot. But at the time, it was instead being viewed as partisan advantage to be taken advantage of and used to win the election. Damn the long-term consequences. They didn't care because they were in, the word you were looking for, collusion with one another. There you have it. Circumstantial evidence, it's not evidence, it's weak evidence, but it can lead to some pretty critical and pretty easily supportable conclusions, that being chief among them. We'll discuss that and more as the week goes on. Time now to hand things over to the guys on the after show for their wrap-up of the weekend and today's morning top news stories. A Baylor University regent, for instance, and prominent Austin lobbyist called female students perverted little tarts for drinking, as sometimes goes on college campuses. We'll hear about that. The U.S. State Department denied travel visas for 6 teenage girls from Afghanistan looking to attend an international robotics competition in Washington, D.C. We're winning hearts and minds everywhere we go. This is what it looks like when the terrorists win, folks. And can't tell the difference between them and the Trump administration. Too weird.
From Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Ooh, another top story we didn't get to today. The Department of Justice's corporate crime watchdog has resigned, asserting her own bosses in the Trump administration have been engaging in conduct that she would never tolerate in corporations and making it basically impossible for her to do her own job. Who would have guessed that corporate crime would go unwatched in the Trump administration? Next.